Well, hello, visitors to and denizens of the YouTubeverse. I'm John, your social hermit in the woods, and I had a craving tonight. I feel like making myself smoked trout spread and maybe a little bit of a charcuterie plate of some other stuff that I have laying around. And I wanted some fresh herb crackers to put that trout spread on. So rather than driving 150 kilometers round trip to the nearest grocery store that would have such a thing, I'm going to make them from scratch and I'm going to show you how to do it. It's real simple, so stick around. Okay, so obviously you can scale this up or down as fits your needs, but we're going to make a batch here using just 1 cup of flour as our starting point. And I need a new 1 cup measuring spoon. The handle broke last week. Okay, so 1 cup of flour. To that, I'm going to add about 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And this is, to taste. I find 1 teaspoon is a little bit too much, and half a teaspoon wasn't quite enough. So about 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Next, we're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. And we're going to want some shortening. Now you could use any kind of, you could use margarine or butter or, a pastry lard. I'm going to use bacon fat because that's what I have. And particularly for savory crackers, I like the taste that gives. Um, and the amount is kind of variable. Also, depending on what shortening you use, the temperatures and the times for the baking will differ a little bit. Some things like margarine will brown or burn faster. So how much? Well, I'm going to use about 1 tablespoon. And you notice I'm not doing that exactly, but I have a 1 tablespoon measure there, and I'm kind of looking, yep, that's about what would fit in there. And it's between a half a tablespoon and 1 tablespoon, depending on how, um, kind of depending on the texture that you want. All right, now we're going to take and blend that in with a fork. You want to get this as evenly blended in as possible. You don't want pockets of shortening, and you want it evenly spread everywhere. So take it as far as you can with the fork, and then you're probably going to have to go ahead in here and just go in with your hands and sort of work it so that there's no pockets of shortening. Now is when you decide what you want for seasonings. I said this is going to be an herb cracker, and I feel like making this today with rosemary and olive oil, both things that have a lot of aroma when you bake them. So this is a good point to do that. Figure out what you're going to add. Good sprinkle of rosemary there. The olive oil we'll put on a little bit later. Okay, mix that in well. Next, you're going to add water. I'm going to do about a half a cup here of slightly warm water. You want this batter to be a little bit on the thin side. I don't know if you call this batter or dough. I guess it's dough, really. Okay, and smear that around with a fork. If it's a little too sticky for your liking, you can, of course, add a little bit more flour. But this looks about right for our purposes here. Okay, and again, once you get it to that stage with a fork, you're probably going to want to take this by hand, and it shouldn't quite stick to your hand. Almost, but not quite. Now we're going to take and lightly flour a surface. Take our plop of dough and start rolling that out. Now the reason you wanted this a little bit thin is just to make the rolling easier. And since you're going to roll this quite thin, the fact that it's got extra liquid in it, extra water, won't be a problem. It'll just bake out very quickly anyways. So you want to roll this to a fairly uniform thickness of, I'm going to say about 3 millimeters. So what would that be? 1/8 of an inch? A 1/16 of an inch is probably too thin, and 1/8 is probably a little too thick, so something in the middle there. Now would be a good time to go ahead and put your oven on. Put it on to about 425 degrees. I said I wanted rosemary and olive oil flavor. The rosemary's already in there. So for the olive oil, I'm actually going to add that on the surface, but not very much. We're just going to drizzle a little bit on here. It's probably less than a teaspoon. And we're going to spread it around by hand. Now, crackers always seem to have those little pokey holes, right? So I don't know if they're essential, but we're going to add them in. So at this stage, you grab yourself your fork, you think of an X or your National Revenue Service or whatever works for you, and you get to work. Very cathartic. Okay, now you're going to need yourself a couple of cookie sheets or pizza pans, and all you're going to do is you're going to cut this into cracker-sized pieces. What's a cracker-sized piece? Well, it kind of depends on your personal preference. Now, I said I'm going to be using these for putting a smoked trout spread on, so I'm going to make them a little bit bigger than usual. The irregularity of shape just adds to the rustic charm of them. So now I take your cut cracker pieces and lay them out on your cookie sheet or your pizza pan, whatever you're going to use. Doesn't really matter. I usually find for a 1 cup recipe, I need 2 cookie sheets for a cookie sheet and a pizza pan in this case. And with that, they go in your oven. Now, I would give those about 10 minutes, but because there's 2 sheets, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to rotate the position of those 2 sheets just to try to make them cook a little bit more evenly. And by this 5-minute switch, you should already be smelling the rosemary and the olive oil pretty strongly. Now at 10 minutes, you'll want to check those. And I know with my oven, that's about the time to flip them. You want to check that when you flip them over, they've got a nice toasty brown look on the underside. And so you're going to flip them over, rotate your pan positions as well, and give them another round for another 5 minutes. So take them out and see how they're a nice toasty brown on the underside. Just flip those over. You could use a spatula to do this, but I actually find it's easier just to do by hand. And back in for another 5 minutes. And with our additional 5 minutes up, we're just going to flop those out onto a surface to cool. There we go. Spread those out and let them cool. So once those are cooled, they're good to eat. Hopefully that gave you an idea. The next time you're in the grocery store and go through that aisle with the really exotic, fancy, rustic, expensive crackers for like wine and cheese nights, those are really expensive and they're really nothing more than this. You can use a little less baking powder. If you cut it out completely, they're pretty lifeless. I've tried that. Same with if you don't use any shortening or if you go much less on the shortening, they're kind of really not very, they're just not very good. So use this as a starting point. Seasonings, whatever tickles your fancy. Lemon pepper and sea salt is an interesting one. You could use like some kind of roasted garlic. You could do little bits of red pepper in there. Rosemary and olive oil, simple and easy. So let's see the final product in use. We've got smoked trout spread. If you want to know how to make that, check out my video on it and the video on how to make the smoked trout to make the spread from. We got a couple of kinds of cheese. We got some pickles. We've got the star of the show, which is our crackers. We've got some olives, sprouts out of my own sprouter, and over here we've got some thin sliced salami. This would be a great place to use homemade jerky as well. Check out my video on how to make that. But the whole point of a charcuterie plate is it's a classy way to use up little bits and pieces of things that you had left over in your fridge. So with that, let's take this and give it a try. Crunchy and delicious. Until next time, this is John, your social hermit in the woods, saying goodbye. So I'll show you some still images here of where this got used in tonight's little dinner, which is really kind of what did I have lying around? I had a smoked trout and some bits and pieces in the fridge, but we'll be classy and we'll call this a charcuterie plate, and that way we can feel classy about it. Well, I hope that gave you some ideas of how to make your own herb crackers easily at home. It's really simple. And until next time, I'm John, your until next time, I'm John, your social hermit in the woods, saying goodbye.